The lobby of Croft Enterprises was less a room and more a statement. It was a cathedral of ambition, paneled in Italian marble so polished it reflected the sky, and held up by columns of brushed steel that climbed 3 stories high. It was a place designed to make people feel small, to remind them of the immense power contained within its walls. And on a Tuesday afternoon, in the center of this cold, echoing space, a 5-year-old girl did something that shattered the illusion. Completely. Her name was Lily. She had pigtails the color of honey and was clutching a worn, one-eyed teddy bear. Her mother, Elara, was on her hands and knees nearby, scrubbing a scuff mark from the floor with the quiet desperation of someone whose job depended on invisibility. Childcare had fallen through, a sudden fever at the daycare, and now Elara's small world of responsibilities had collided with the vast, unforgiving universe of Julian Croft. He entered just as she was trying to coax Lily back to a hidden corner. Behind a potted ficus, Julian Croft didn't walk. He moved like a storm front, a whirlwind of tailored charcoal wool and quiet, immense authority. Flanked by 2 executives in sharp suits, he was discussing billion-dollar mergers in a voice that was low and smooth, yet carried the implicit threat of thunder. Lily, however, heard none of the threat. She only saw the man at the center of the storm. He was tall, like the king in her storybooks. He stood straight and looked at everyone as if he were in charge of the whole world. She had a drawing in her pocket, a crayon sketch of a stick figure. Man with a crown, a man she called Daddy. This man looked just like him. Breaking free from her mother's grasp, she took 10 determined steps across the marble expanse. The clicking of her little shoes was the only sound in a lobby that suddenly held its breath. The executives stopped talking. The receptionist's fingers froze over her keyboard. Elara's heart stopped beating altogether. Lily reached the titan of industry, tugged on the immaculate fabric of his trousers, and looked up with wide, impossibly blue eyes in a voice that was clear and achingly innocent. She asked the question that would ignite a fire in the heart of the city's coldest man. "Excuse me," she said politely. "Are you my daddy?" Julian Croft looked down. His gaze, usually reserved for dissecting corporate balance sheets and finding fatal flaws, fell upon the small, upturned face. For a single, frozen moment, the world seemed to warp. The air grew thick. His perfectly ordered universe, a landscape of profit margins and calculated risks, was suddenly invaded by a variable he could never have predicted. One of the executives, a woman named Victoria, let out a disbelieving scoff. "For heaven's sake," she muttered, her eyes dripping with disdain for the janitor and her runaway child. Elara scrambled forward, her face burning with a shame so hot it felt like a physical blow. "I am so sorry, Mr. Croft. So sorry. She didn't mean, she's just a little girl." She grabbed Lily's hand, her voice trembling. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go." "I'm so sorry, sir." Julian's expression was unreadable, a mask of cold granite. He didn't look at Elara. He didn't look at Victoria. He only looked at the child, whose question still hung in the air like a ghost. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible shake of his head, not in answer to the question, but as if to clear it from the air. "See that this breach in protocol doesn't happen again," he said, his voice like chipping ice. The words weren't directed at Elara, but at the air around her, as if she herself were too insignificant to address directly. Then, he turned and continued his path toward the private elevators, the storm reforming around him, leaving Elara and Lily in the deafening silence of his wake. Elara pulled her daughter close, her body shaking, the sting of public humiliation bringing tears to her eyes. She didn't see the look on Julian Croft's face as the elevator doors slid shut. The mask had slipped. For a fraction of a second, the billionaire CEO looked utterly, completely lost. He leaned against the polished steel wall, his breath catching in his throat, haunted by the impossible blue of a little girl's eyes there. Apartment was small, but the air inside was warm. It smelled of cinnamon from Lily's morning toast and the faint, clean scent of the lavender soap Elara used. It was a world away from the sterile, metallic scent of Croft Tower. Here, Elara was not an invisible janitor. She was a queen, and her kingdom was this tiny, 2-room walk-up. Every night, she would sit by Lily's bed and tell her stories. Not of princesses trapped in towers, but of brilliant architects who built cities in the clouds and brave botanists who discovered magical, glowing flowers deep in the jungle. She was feeding her daughter dreams, the same dreams she once had for herself. Before the worn-out uniform and the bucket of murky water, Alara had been a star student at the city's most prestigious design school. She had a scholarship, a portfolio that professors called visionary, and a future that seemed as bright and limitless as the skyline she sketched in her notebooks. Then she met a man. He wasn't a prince, but he felt like one. He was passionate, driven, with eyes that saw the world not for what it was, but for what it could be. They met at a campus coffee shop, arguing over the structural integrity of a Frank Gehry building. Theirs was a love affair of whirlwind intensity, built on shared dreams and whispered promises under city lights. His name was simply Jay in her memories now, a single initial to contain an entire universe of pain. When she told him she was pregnant, the universe collapsed. He had a family, he'd explained vaguely, a powerful father who had a path for him. A child, right now, was not part of that path. He promised he would figure it out, that he would come back for her. He never did. He vanished, leaving behind nothing but a ghost in her heart and the tiny, perfect life growing inside her. The scholarship required full-time attendance, something she could no longer manage. Her dreams were packed away in a cardboard box, replaced by the urgent, crushing reality of survival. She took the janitorial job at Croft Tower because the night shift allowed her to be with Lily during the day. No one there knew her past. No one saw the ghost of the brilliant architect behind the tired eyes of the woman who cleaned their floors. To them, she was just part of the scenery, as functional and unnoticeable as a water fountain. But someone had noticed her. After the incident in the lobby, Julian Croft couldn't settle. He sat in his penthouse office. The city lights spread beneath him like a carpet of fallen stars, and replayed the scene in his mind. The girl's voice, her eyes, pull. The security footage from the lobby. He commanded his head of security over the phone. Timestamp 14:30. I want every angle. A security issue, Mr. Croft? The man asked. Yes, Julian lied, his voice tight. A security issue. He wasn't a man given to whimsy. He was a creature of logic and data. But the child's question had bypassed his rational mind and struck something deeper, something he thought he'd buried years ago. A memory of a different pair of blue eyes, full of fierce intelligence and a love so pure it had terrified him. He watched the footage on his monitor. He saw the janitor, her face etched with a quiet dignity even as she scrubbed the floor. He saw the little girl break away. He zoomed in on her face, a perfect blend of innocence and curiosity. Then he zoomed in on the mother's face as she rushed to apologize, Alara Vance. Her name on the employee file was unremarkable. But her face was a phantom limb, an ache from a life he'd been forced to amputate. Down in the security office, an old guard named George watched Alara pack up her things for the night. He'd worked there for 30 years and had a gentle soul. Don't you pay any mind to Mr. Croft, he said softly. He hasn't been right for years. Not since his fiancée left him. Alara looked up, surprised. His fiancée? Oh, yeah, about 5, maybe 6 years ago. George recalled, leaning against a console. A whirlwind romance, they said. He was a different man then. Smiled more. But his father, the old man, apparently didn't approve. Word is, she took a payoff and disappeared. He turned to ice after that. Built this whole empire. But I think he lost whatever made him warm. Alara's heart gave a painful throb. A story of a powerful father, a broken engagement. It felt unervingly familiar. She shook her head, dismissing it. The city was full of sad stories. Hers was just one of millions. The next day, the tension in the tower was thicker. Victoria Vance, the ambitious executive from the lobby, seemed to have made it her personal mission to torment Alara. She would accidentally spill her latte near where Alara was cleaning, making passive-aggressive comments about competence. During her lunch break, Alara sat in a deserted stairwell, sketching on a napkin. It was a habit she couldn't break. Her mind was always building, always designing. She drew a concept for a cantilevered bridge, its lines elegant and impossible. Victoria, heading down to the parking garage, happened to pass the open door. She glanced in and froze. She didn't recognize Alara's face, but she recognized the style of the sketch. It was reminiscent of a legendary student portfolio she'd seen years ago when she was judging a university design competition. A prodigy who had vanished without a trace. A cold, jealous fear coiled in Victoria's stomach. This janitor, could she be? The thought was absurd, but the drawing was undeniably brilliant. A threat. Victoria was a key player in the firm's bid for the new Helios project, a massive civic redevelopment plan. Her own designs were competent, but lacked soul. What she saw on that napkin, that was genius. And genius in the hands of a janitor was a threat to her own ascent. She had to extinguish it. Later that afternoon, a new architectural model for the Helios project, worth tens of thousands of dollars, was unveiled in a private conference room. It was Victoria's pride and joy. When the room was empty, Victoria slipped back inside. With a look of cold calculation, she picked up a heavy mug of black coffee, glanced at the security camera in the corner, and then carefully, deliberately, tipped it over. The dark liquid cascaded down the delicate model, staining the white structures, warping the miniature streets. She knew the night cleaner's schedule. She knew Alara would be the one to find it. And she knew who would take the fall. The discovery was devastating. Alara found the ruined model at the start of her shift, her heart sinking into a black pit of dread. The smell of stale coffee and crushed ambition filled the room. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that she would be blamed, her supervisor's face was a mask of fury. This is catastrophic. Mr. Croft is going to see this in the morning. This came from your section, Alara. How could you be so careless? I didn't, she whispered, but her words were lost in his tirade. She was suspended, pending an investigation that felt like a mere formality before her termination. The walk home that night was the longest of her life. How would she provide? For Lily? The fear was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. To make matters worse, Lily's fever had spiked. The little girl was listless, her skin hot to the touch. Alara held her all night, the child's soft, whimpering breaths a rhythm of terror in the quiet apartment. With no job and a sick child, she had never felt more alone. Up in his sterile penthouse, Julian Croft was also having a sleepless night. The image of Lily's face was burned into his mind. He had the security report on his desk, the one detailing the accidental destruction of the Helios model. It named Alara Vance as the sole person with access to the room during the time of the incident. It was clean, simple, a janitor's carelessness, but it didn't feel right. The woman who scrubbed his floors with such quiet focus, the mother whose eyes held a universe of fierce protection, it didn't align. Acting on a gut feeling he couldn't explain, he bypassed the official report and requested the raw security footage for himself. He sat in the dark, the only light coming from the large monitor on his wall. He watched the timeline. He saw Victoria and the other executives leave. He saw the room, empty. Then, the door opened and he leaned forward. It wasn't Alara. It was Victoria. He watched, his jaw tightening, as she picked up the coffee mug. He saw the deliberate calculation in her eyes, the way she checked her angles with the camera. He saw her pour the liquid poison onto her own project. The act was so cold, so venomous, it made his blood run cold. She had framed the janitor. A woman who had already been publicly humiliated, a woman who was a single mother just trying to survive. A wave of something hot and unfamiliar washed over him. Rage. Pure, unadulterated rage on behalf of someone else. Then, he froze the frame. He zoomed in on the janitor's file, still open on his second screen. Alara Vance. And below it, her previous address. An address near the university campus. An address he knew. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. He strode across his office to a closet he hadn't opened in years. Inside was a wooden box, filled with relics from a past life. He pulled it out, his hands trembling as he lifted the lid. Inside were photographs of him and a young woman, their faces bright with love and laughter. Her hair was longer, her eyes weren't shadowed by exhaustion, but they were the same eyes. The same brilliant, captivating blue eyes. Alara, and beneath the photos was a stack of letters, bound with a faded ribbon. Letters he had never seen. They were addressed to him, sent to his old apartment. Jay, where are you? Your father's assistant came to see me. He offered me money. He said you were done with me. I don't believe him. Please, just call me. Jay, it's been a month. I'm scared. I'm pregnant. Julian, I'm going to have our baby. I don't care about your father or your money. I just wanted you. I will love this child enough for both of us. I hope, one day, you'll come find us." The letters went on, each one more desperate, then more resolved than the last. His father, his cold, controlling father, had orchestrated the entire thing. He'd told Julian that Alara had taken a $100,000 payout and signed a non-disclosure agreement, that she wanted nothing to do with him or his world. He had shown Julian a forged bank statement and a signed document. A lie. It was all a lie. He had believed it. Consumed by the betrayal, he had thrown himself into his work, building an empire on the foundations of a broken heart, becoming the cold, ruthless man his father always wanted him to be. He had abandoned her. He had abandoned his child, the little girl in the lobby. "Are you my daddy?" It wasn't a random question. It was the universe screaming a truth he had been too blind to see. Lily. Her name was Lily. She had his eyes. No, that wasn't right. She had Alara's eyes. The eyes he had first fallen in love with. A guttural sound, something between a sob and a roar, tore from his throat. The polished CEO, the titan of industry, shattered. In his place was just a man, hollowed out by a 5-year-old lie he had. To find her, he had to find them. That he raced from his office, a man possessed. He didn't take the elevator. He took the stairs, 2 at a time, his mind a chaotic storm of regret and panic. He burst into the main office floor, his sudden, wild appearance shocking the late-night staff. "Where is she?" he demanded of Alara's supervisor, who was locking up. "Alara Vance. Where does she live?" The supervisor, stammering, handed over the address from her file. Julian was out the door before the man could even ask what was happening. He drove through the city, breaking every speed limit, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. That he found the rundown apartment building, took the stairs 3 at a time, and pounded on her door. Alara opened it a crack, her face pale with exhaustion. She was holding a sleeping Lily, wrapped in a blanket. Seeing him, her eyes widened in fear. She thought he was here to officially fire her, to threaten her. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice a fragile shield that Julian's gaze fell from. Her face to the child in her arms. Lily's face, peaceful in sleep, was a perfect, heartbreaking miniature of Alara's. He could see the faint trace of his own jawline, the shape of her brow. The air left his lungs. The truth was standing right in front of him, breathing softly. In her mother's arms. "Alara," he breathed, his voice cracking. The sound of her name, spoken by him after all these years, hung between them. The letters. I just found the letters." Tears streamed down his face, the first he had shed since he was a boy. The cold, granite mask of Julian Croft was gone, washed away by a flood of unbearable regret. He lied. My father. He lied about everything. Alara stared at him, her own eyes filling with tears as the meaning of his words crashed down upon her. The ghost she had tried to bury, the man she had loved and lost, was standing on her doorstep, his empire crumbling at his feet. The next morning, an emergency board meeting was called at Croft Enterprises. The entire executive team was assembled in the main boardroom on the 50th floor, the air thick with nervous energy and speculation. At the head of the long, obsidian table sat Victoria Vance, looking exceptionally smug. She believed the meeting was to formally announce her as the new head of the Helios project, a reward for her vigilance in discovering the sabotage. The doors swung open and Julian Croft entered. But this was not the CEO they were used to. The usual cold, impenetrable aura was gone. In its place was a raw, quiet intensity that was far more intimidating. He didn't take his seat. He walked to the front of the room, by the massive screen, used for presentations. "Good morning," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "There has been a serious incident regarding the Helios project. An act of sabotage that threatened to derail months of work and millions of dollars in investment." He looked directly at Victoria. A flicker of a triumphant smile played on her lips. "We have identified the person responsible," Julian continued. He clicked a button on a remote. The screen behind him flickered to life. It was not a PowerPoint presentation. It was security footage. The room fell silent as they watched the clear, undeniable video of Victoria Vance, their colleague, their supposed team leader, deliberately and maliciously destroying the architectural model. The collective gasp went through the room. Victoria's face went from smug triumph to ashen horror in a single, brutal second. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The video played on a loop, her crime replaying in silent, damning repetition for all to see. Julian let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the betrayal settle over the room. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He was something far worse. He was disappointed. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and final. "Victoria, clean out your desk. Your access has been revoked. An escort will see you out." He didn't need to raise his voice. The quiet finality of his words was a guillotine. Humiliated, exposed, and utterly broken, Victoria stumbled from her chair and fled the room without a word, the stares of her former colleagues burning into her back. Julian turned back to the stunned board members. This company was built on the idea of innovation, integrity, and vision. We lost sight of that. I lost sight of that. We became a place where ambition was valued over talent, where cruelty was mistaken for strength. He paused, taking a deep breath. The Helios project is not dead. In fact, it's about to be reborn. Because for the past 5 years, the person with the true vision for this project, the most brilliant architectural mind I have ever known, hasn't been sitting at this table. She's been cleaning its floors. He gestured toward the boardroom. Doors. They opened, and Alara walked in. She was not in her janitor's uniform. She was wearing a simple, dark blue dress she had owned for years, but she wore it with a newfound strength. Her head was held high, her eyes clear. She looked nervous, but not afraid. In her hand, she held a single, rolled-up piece of paper. A wave of confusion and shock rippled through the room. The executives stared, their minds struggling to reconcile the image of the janitor they'd ignored for years with the woman now being presented as their savior. "This is Alara Vance," Julian announced, his voice filled with a profound respect that silenced all murmurs. She was the top student in her class at the Northwood Design Institute before she was forced to leave. Her original concepts, which she developed as a student, were the secret inspiration for the Helios project in the first place. He turned to her, his expression softening. "Alara, would you do us the honor?" With a steady hand, Alara walked to the table and unrolled the piece of paper. It wasn't a professional blueprint. It was the napkin she had sketched on in the stairwell. She laid it flat on the table. The drawing was a masterpiece of elegance and ingenuity. It showed a new vision for the city's waterfront, with sweeping green spaces, sustainable energy towers that looked like sculptures, and a pedestrian bridge that soared like a bird's wing. It was breathtaking. It was the soul the project had been missing. Julian looked at the stunned faces of his board. Alara Vance will be taking over as the lead designer for the Helios project, effective immediately. She will be given a full team, an unlimited budget, and the complete support of this company. We will not just build a new development. We will build her vision. He then looked at Alara, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "I am so sorry for everything." It wasn't just an apology for the ruined model or the public humiliation. It was an apology for 5 lost years, for a lie that had stolen their past and nearly destroyed their future. In that moment, watching the woman he had wronged step into the power she had always deserved, Julian Croft began the long, painful, and necessary journey of redemption. The foundation of his empire was cracking, and he was finally ready to rebuild it with something stronger than steel. Truth point: 6 months later, the city looked different. Or perhaps it was just that Alara was seeing it from a new perspective. She now had an office on the 49th floor of Croft Tower, right next to Julian's. It had a floor-to-ceiling window with a view that stretched to the horizon. The walls weren't bare. They were covered in blueprints, sketches, and 3D renderings of the Helios project, which was now underway and being hailed by critics as the most innovative urban design of the century. She was no longer invisible. She was a leader, a visionary. Her team of architects and engineers admired her, not just for her talent, but for her quiet grace and her unshakable integrity. She had found her voice, not by shouting, but by designing a better world. The transformation in Julian was even more profound. The cold, ruthless CEO was gone, replaced by a man who was learning to listen. He had dismantled the toxic, high-pressure culture his father had built, replacing it with one that valued collaboration and, above all, humanity. He had visited his father, not for a confrontation, but for a quiet, final conversation where he laid down the truth and walked away, freeing himself from the old man's shadow forever. But the most important reconstruction project was not happening in the city skyline. It was happening on a Saturday morning in a bright, sun-drenched kitchen. The kitchen belonged to a modest, beautiful house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a house Julian had bought for them. It smelled of pancake batter and melting butter. Alara was at the stove, flipping a pancake, a genuine, easy smile on her face. Lily, now 6, was sitting at the wooden table, meticulously decorating her own pancake with a face made of blueberries and whipped cream. Julian stood nearby, awkwardly, trying to help. He was wearing a simple sweater, not a suit, and he had a smudge of flour on his cheek. He looked younger, softer. He was still learning how to be a father, how to be part of a family. He was often clumsy with his affection, unsure of the right words, but he showed up. Every single day, he showed up. "Daddy, you need a smiley face, too," Lily declared, pointing her syrupy fork at him. She giggled, then reached out and dabbed a small dollop of whipped cream on the tip of his nose. For a moment, the old Julian would have flinched at the mess. But the new Julian just froze, his eyes wide. Then, a sound filled the kitchen that Alara had never heard from him before. A deep, genuine, rumbling laugh. It was the sound of ice breaking apart after a long winter. Alara turned from the stove, her heart swelling. This was it. This was the payoff. Not the fancy office, not the acclaim, but this. This simple, warm, messy moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. Later that week, they were at Lily's school for her first art fair. The gymnasium was filled with proud parents and colorful, chaotic displays of childhood creativity. They found Lily's section. Taped to the wall was her latest drawing. It wasn't the old sketch of the stick figure king she used to carry in her pocket. This was a new picture, drawn with care. It showed 3 figures, standing under a brightly shining sun. A man, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands. Underneath, in wobbly, crayon letters, she had written a single caption, "My family." Julian stared at the drawing, his throat tightening. He saw the 5 years he had lost, the moments he could never get back. But he also saw the future they were building, one crayon drawing, one pancake breakfast at a time. The regret was still there, a faint scar on his soul, but it was overshadowed by an immense, overwhelming gratitude. He turned to Alara, his eyes shining with unshed tears. The noisy gymnasium seemed to fade away. "I spent my entire adult life building an empire of glass and steel," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought that's what strength was, but it was all hollow. It was a fortress to hide a broken man." He took her hands in his. They were no longer the chapped, calloused hands of a janitor, but the strong, creative hands of an architect. "You, Alara," he continued softly. "You and Lily, you taught me how to build something real. You taught me that the strongest foundations are made of forgiveness, that the most beautiful structures are built with love." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. He knelt, right there on the linoleum floor of the school gymnasium, ignoring the surprised looks of the people around them. "Alara Vance," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Will you build a life with me? Will you and Lily be my family? Officially and forever?" Tears streamed down Alara's face as she looked from the man kneeling before her to the drawing on the wall, and then to their daughter, who was watching them with a wide, knowing smile. Her answer was a quiet, certain, and joyful yes. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, because their story had been too real, too raw for that. It was something better. It was a true beginning, built not on fantasy, but on the hard-won, beautiful, and unshakable truth. If this story reminded you that truth always finds its way home, and that the strongest foundations are built with love, subscribe to Stories That Breathe for more.